I'd like to show you a photograph. It's a simple image, a crowded city street somewhere in America, taken in the mid-1950s. Look closely. You'll see men in gray suits walking in the same direction, carrying the same style of briefcase, wearing the same slightly tired expression. They're heading somewhere work, probably, or home from it. The street is packed with them, shoulder to shoulder, a river of humanity flowing towards some common destination. Now let me ask you a question. If I were to take that same photograph today, same street corner, same time of day, what would be different? The suits might be slightly different cuts. The briefcases might be replaced by bags or backpacks. There'd be phones in pockets now, perhaps earbuds and different hairstyles. But would anything fundamental have changed? Look again at that 1950s photograph. What you're seeing isn't just a picture of people. You're seeing a picture of a current, a river of humanity flowing in the same direction, thinking the same thoughts, making the same decisions, and arriving at the same destination. And that destination, for the vast majority of them, is financial failure. Here's something that most people never learn, and I want you to really think about this. What we assume to be individual choice is largely invisible conformity. The person in that photograph doesn't feel like they're conforming. They feel like they're making sensible decisions, practical decisions, realistic decisions. But they're doing exactly what everyone around them is doing, and they'll arrive exactly where everyone around them arrives. Now, why do I say that? Because the statistics are devastating, and they haven't changed much since that photograph was taken. Let's take 100 people who start their working lives at age 25. Just regular people, equal in education, roughly equal in opportunity, full of the same hopes and dreams that you and I have. Do you have any idea what will happen to those 100 people by the time they reach 65? Only one will be wealthy. 4 will be financially independent. 5 will still be working, not because they want to, but because they have to. 36 will be dead. And 54, more than half, will be broke, dependent on others for life's necessities. After 40 years of working, striving, hoping, only 5 out of 100 make the grade. Now here's the key. Why? Why, in this land of abundant opportunity, where anyone with determination can rise, do 95 out of every 100 people fail to achieve even basic financial independence? The answer isn't what you've been told. It isn't bad luck. It isn't the economy. It isn't lack of education or the wrong career or circumstances beyond their control. Every one of those 54 broke individuals at 65 had explanations, reasons why it wasn't their fault, why their situation was different, why the statistics somehow didn't apply to them. But the statistics applied. They always do. The truth is simpler and far more unsettling. Those 95% failed because they did what the 95% does. They conformed. They followed. They absorbed the crowd's thinking like a sponge absorbs water passively, unconsciously, without ever stopping to examine whether that thinking was leading somewhere they wanted to go. Rollo May, the distinguished psychologist, wrote something that struck me with tremendous force when I first encountered it. He said the opposite of courage in our society is not cowardice, it is conformity. Not cowardice, conformity. Do you see what that means? The person who ends up broke at 65 didn't lack courage in the conventional sense. They weren't afraid to work hard. They weren't afraid to show up every day and do their jobs. What they lacked was the courage to think differently from the crowd. They lacked the courage to question whether normal was leading anywhere worth going. And here's what makes this so insidious. Conformity doesn't feel like conformity when you're in it. The crowd doesn't feel like a crowd. It feels like reality. It feels like common sense. It feels like the way things are done. When everyone around you makes similar financial decisions, leasing cars, carrying balances, upgrading lifestyles with every raise, those decisions seem normal, sensible, what everyone does. But what everyone does leads to where everyone ends up. And where everyone ends up, statistically speaking, is broke. Look at that photograph one more time. What seemed like a picture of individuals going about their lives has become something else entirely. It's a picture of a current, a river. And rivers, by their nature, carry everything in them to the same destination. The question you must ask yourself, the question that will determine which statistic you become, is whether you're in that river without knowing it. Most people are. Most people never even see the current. But now you're beginning to see it. And seeing it, really seeing it, is where everything changes. The current is real. The river is flowing. And in the next chapter, we'll examine exactly where it leads and why the arithmetic is so devastating for those who let it carry them along. Let me tell you something which, if you really understand it, will alter your view of success and failure completely. We talked about those 100 people who start at age 25. We saw the statistics. Only 5 will achieve financial independence by 65. But statistics are abstract. Let me make this concrete. Think about the people you graduated high school with. Think about your neighborhood growing up, your first workplace, your extended family. In your mind, take 100 of them, real people, with real faces, real names, real dreams. 40 years from now, when they're 65, more than half of them will be financially dependent on others. They'll be relying on family, on government programs, on whatever charity comes their way. After 4 decades of working, they'll have nothing to show for it but memories and regrets. Now, why do you suppose that is? It's not intelligence. Plenty of intelligent people end up broke. It's not hard work. The 54 who fail work just as many hours as the 5 who succeeded, perhaps more. It's not opportunity. They all lived in the same country, shopped in the same stores, had access to the same information. The difference is in what they thought, and what most of them thought was exactly what everyone around them thought. Here's the key. The 5% success rate isn't random. It isn't bad luck distributed unevenly. It's a direct measurement of how many people think independently versus how many follow the crowd. 95% conform, 95% fail. The numbers are not coincidence. They're cause and effect. The person who is broke at 65 made a decision at 25. Not a decision to be broke, of course, no one decides that. They made a decision to be realistic, to be practical, to do what made sense, to follow the path that everyone else was following. They looked around at their peers and calibrated their expectations accordingly. They heard advice about how the real world works and accepted it without examination. They absorbed the crowd's attitudes about money, spending, saving, and success, the same way we all absorb the air we breathe automatically, unconsciously, without ever questioning whether it might be poison. I call this the sponge effect. A sponge absorbs whatever liquid surrounds it. It doesn't discriminate, it doesn't analyze, it simply absorbs. The human mind, particularly the young human mind, works the same way. We absorb the attitudes of our environment without ever realizing we're doing it. We think we're making independent decisions when we're actually repeating patterns we absorbed years ago. And here's where it becomes truly dangerous. The person who absorbs conformist attitudes doesn't feel like they're conforming. They feel like they're being sensible. Listen to the vocabulary of the crowd. That's just not realistic. You have to be practical. That's how the real world works. You can't fight the system. Money doesn't grow on trees. You have to pay your dues. These phrases aren't wisdom. They're the crowd enforcing itself. They're conformity wearing the mask of common sense. Now think about this. When someone tells you to be realistic, what are they really saying? They're saying to lower your expectations, to fit in, to do what everyone else does. They're not giving you wisdom, they're recruiting you into the 95%. Emerson saw this clearly more than 100 years ago. He wrote, "Society everywhere is in conspiracy against the manhood of every one of its members." He wasn't being cynical, he was describing a mechanism. The crowd must reproduce itself. It does so by making conformity seem like wisdom and independence seem like foolishness. Let's go back to those 100 people at age 25. They're all standing at the same starting line. They all have roughly 40 years ahead of them. At that moment, every one of them believes they'll be successful. Every one of them has plans and dreams. Every one of them thinks the statistics somehow don't apply to them. I understand that most people fail, they tell themselves, but my situation is different. It isn't. That belief, the assumption of immunity, is itself conformity. Every one of the 54 who end up broke believed the same thing at 25. They all thought they were exceptions. The error most people make with statistics is assuming they won't apply personally. But you don't escape a statistic by ignoring it. You escape it by understanding why it exists and doing something different. Why do 95% fail? Because 95% do what 95% do. They think what everyone thinks, they accept what everyone accepts. They make the decisions that seem normal, sensible, and practical which happen to be exactly the decisions that produce the normal, sensible, practical result: failure. The crowd has no leader. This is the part that most people never grasp. When you follow a crowd, you assume someone at the front knows where they're going. You assume there's a destination, a plan, a reason why everyone is moving in that direction. But there isn't. The crowd moves because movement is easier than choosing. The crowd flows because that's what currents do. The crowd has no captain, no compass, no port in mind. It just flows. And it flows, as rivers do, downhill, toward the path of least resistance, toward wherever that path leads. Here's the question you must now confront. If following the crowd guarantees arrival at the crowd's destination, and the crowd's destination is failure, then what do the 5% do differently? What do they understand that the 95% never learn? That question leads us to the strangest financial secret in the world, and it's far simpler and far more unsettling than you might expect. Here's the key to understanding why you may be broke or why you might become broke despite your best intentions, and more importantly, how to change it. The crowd is always wrong about the things that matter most. Now let me say that again, because this is the central revelation everything else depends upon. The crowd is always wrong about the things that matter most. I'm not saying the crowd is stupid. I'm not saying the people in it are bad or lazy or undeserving. I'm saying something far more precise. The crowd, by its very nature, moves toward the average, and the average result in terms of financial success is failure. Think of it this way. Imagine a river flowing downhill, as all rivers do. It moves naturally, effortlessly, following the path of least resistance. Now imagine someone standing at the edge of that river, looking up at a mountain peak. They want to reach the top. What happens if they step into the current and let it carry them? They end up exactly where the river ends, at the lowest point, the valley, the place where all water gathers when it takes the easy path. The crowd is like that river. It flows naturally, inevitably, toward the path of least resistance. It moves toward comfort, toward the familiar, toward what everyone else is already doing. And that path leads with mathematical certainty to where paths of least resistance always lead, downward. Here's what the 5% understand that the 95% never grasp. Success requires moving against the current. Not because difficulty has inherent virtue, not because struggle is noble, but because the current is already carrying everyone else toward the rocks. If you want to end up somewhere different, you must move differently. This brings us to a technique that sounds almost too simple to be powerful. Yet it separates the 5% from the 95% more reliably than any other single practice. The technique is deliberate opposition. When you face any significant decision, especially a financial one, examine what the majority would do. Look carefully at the popular choice, the common path, the normal response. Then seriously consider the opposite. Not blindly, not rebelliously, not to be different for its own sake, but thoughtfully. Examine the opposite as a genuine option, asking if the common choice produces common results, and common results mean failure, what choice might produce exceptional results? Let me give you a concrete example. When the average person receives a raise, what do? They expand their lifestyle to match their new income. Bigger apartment, newer car, more dinners out, better vacations. The crowd calls this enjoying life and treating yourself. It feels good, it seems natural, it's what everyone does. And 10 years later, despite earning substantially more money than when they started, they've saved nothing. They're in exactly the same position financially or worse, because their expanded lifestyle has become their new baseline, their new need, their new minimum for feeling comfortable. Now, what does the person who understands the principle do? They receive the same raise, they feel the same temptation to upgrade, but they pause. They ask, what does the majority do here? The answer is clear: expand lifestyle, increase spending, enjoy the upgrade. So they consider the opposite. What if they kept their lifestyle exactly the same? What if they directed the entire raise toward assets, investments, savings, things that grow while they sleep? What if treating themselves meant investing in their future self rather than consuming in their present self? Same situation, same raise, same opportunity, opposite responses, opposite destinations. It's that simple. Now here's something interesting. This principle isn't new. I'm not telling you something that wise people haven't understood for thousands of years. The Bible puts it this way: enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. The narrow gate, the road less traveled, the path of the few versus the highway of the many. Every wisdom tradition, across every culture, has observed the same truth. The way of the many leads down, the way of the few leads up. This isn't mysticism, it's observation. It's what anyone can see if they look at results rather than at intentions. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and philosopher, wrote that the impediment to action advances action, meaning that resistance is often the signal of the right direction. Emerson declared that whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. William James, whom many consider the father of American psychology, discovered that human beings can alter their lives by altering their attitudes of mind, not their circumstances, their attitudes. The internal shift precedes the external change. The consensus throughout history is overwhelming. Independent thinking is the prerequisite for exceptional results. Now here's the error to avoid, and it's the error that keeps people from understanding this principle correctly: mindless contrarianism. Doing the opposite, simply to be different, is just another form of being controlled by the crowd, only in reverse. If you define yourself by what you're against, you're still letting the crowd determine your direction. The principle isn't always do the opposite. It's always examine the opposite. When you notice yourself about to do what everyone does, stop, pause, ask the question. Seriously consider whether the opposite might serve you better. Sometimes examination reveals that the common choice is correct. The crowd isn't wrong about everything. But when it comes to the things that matter most, the decisions that compound over time, the choices that determine whether you end up in the 5% or the 95%, the crowd is almost always wrong. The crowd optimizes for present comfort. The 5% optimize for future freedom. The crowd takes the path of least resistance. The 5% take the path of greatest growth. The crowd asks, what will be easiest? The 5% ask, what will be best? Different questions, different answers, different destinations. You now have the principle that explains why the 95% fail and what the 5% do differently. But a principle without evidence creates fragile belief. You need to see this operating in real life, in real situations, with real examples. And that requires understanding how small differences so small they seem insignificant in the moment, compound into entirely different lives over time. Let me tell you about one of the most underestimated forces in human life. Most people think that dramatic differences require dramatic changes. They believe that if someone ended up wealthy while another ended up broke, there must have been some massive difference in their paths, some lucky break, some crucial connection, some extraordinary ability. But that's not what actually happens. The difference between the 5% and the 95% isn't dramatic, it's geometric. Small variations in thinking and decision-making, consistently maintained over time, produce entirely different destinations. The gap between success and failure is built not in single dramatic moments, but in thousands of small decisions, each one seemingly insignificant, all of them compounding. Think of it this way. Consider a ship leaving port, bound for a destination thousands of miles away. Now imagine that ship adjusts its course by just 1 degree. 1 single degree. The passengers notice nothing. The horizon looks exactly the same. The change is imperceptible. But after traveling 1,000 miles, that ship is now dozens of miles away from where it would have been. After 5,000 miles, it's hundreds of miles off the original course. After 10,000 miles, which is roughly the distance from Los Angeles to Australia and back, that 1 degree difference has put the ship on an entirely different continent. 1 degree, over enough time and distance, produces a completely different destination. The 5% and the 95% don't live dramatically different daily lives. They don't eat different foods, breathe different air, walk through different cities. The difference is, in their heading, a slight adjustment in how they think about decisions, how they evaluate choices, how they respond to the constant flow of financial moments that make up a life. They've adjusted course by 1 degree in opposite directions. The math does the rest. Here's the key. Wealth is built by the hour, not by the year. The 95% think in terms of windfalls, bonuses, lucky breaks. They're waiting for the big moment, the inheritance, the winning ticket, the deal that changes everything. They're waiting for something to happen to them. The 5% think differently. They think about what they can do today, this hour, this moment. They build their financial foundation 1 brick at a time, knowing that bricks eventually become buildings. Let me make this concrete. Consider 2 people who start working at the same company on the same day at the same salary, 25 years old, same education, same potential. Over the next 10 years, they'll both receive raises, bonuses, and promotions at roughly the same rate. Their circumstances will be nearly identical, but their outcomes will be completely different. The first person makes the decisions the crowd makes. When they get their first raise, they upgrade their apartment, a nicer place in a better neighborhood. Reasonable. Everyone does it. When they buy a car, they lease a new one because the payments are lower and they can get something nicer. Practical. That's what most people do. When they go out with friends, they don't worry about the bill. They're young, they're earning, life is short. Normal. The second person makes slightly different decisions. When they get that first raise, they stay in the smaller apartment another 2 years and direct the difference to a simple investment account. When they need a car, they buy a reliable used one and own it outright. When they go out with friends, they go, but they've already moved money to savings before it could be spent. Neither person feels they're making significant choices. Neither feels like they're sacrificing or striving for some distant goal. They're both just living their lives, making the decisions that seem sensible to them. But one person sensible is what the crowd does. The other person sensible is 1 degree off consistently, month after month, year after year. After 10 years, the first person has a nicer lifestyle and nothing else. The second person has the same lifestyle they had at 25, plus a growing foundation of assets that's beginning to generate its own returns. After 20 years, the gap is enormous. After 40 years, they might as well have lived on different planets. Same starting point, same opportunities, same apparent effort, 1 degree difference in direction. Maintained over time. Entirely different destinations. William James, the great psychologist, made an observation that captures this perfectly. He said, "The greatest discovery of my generation is that human beings can alter their lives by altering their attitudes of mind." Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say by changing their circumstances or by working harder or by getting lucky. He said attitudes of mind. Small adjustments in how we think, which produce small adjustments in how we decide, which produce small adjustments in how we act, compounding over years and decades into entirely different lives. Now here's the error to avoid: waiting for the big opportunity while ignoring the small ones. The 95% say, "I'll start investing when I have more money." Meanwhile, the 5% invest what they have, even if it's just $20 a month, because they understand that the habit matters more than the amount. The 95% say, "I'll get serious about my finances when things settle down." But things never settle down. There's always a reason to wait. And waiting is itself a decision to keep the current heading, to keep flowing with the river. Waiting for perfect conditions is itself conformity. The crowd is always waiting. The 5% are always beginning. The question isn't whether you can make one dramatic decision that will transform your life. The question is whether you can make one slightly different decision today and another tomorrow and another the day after that, each one too small to notice, all of them compounding toward a destination that the crowd will never reach. 1 degree, over 10,000 miles. It's that simple. But there's something deeper operating here, something that explains why some people adjust their heading while others don't. And it has to do with a fundamental misunderstanding about the relationship between money, service, and success. Now let me tell you something that the 95% have exactly backwards and that the 5% understand intuitively. Money is an effect, not a cause. Now let me say that again, because this single reversal explains more about financial success and failure than almost any other insight. Money is an effect, not a cause. The 95% spend their lives chasing money directly. They think about how to get more of it, how to earn more of it, how to capture more of it. They negotiate for higher salaries before they've increased their value. They look for quick returns before they've built solid foundations. They ask, how can I get more? Before they've asked, how can I give more? And in doing so, they guarantee their own failure. Because you cannot chase an effect. You can only create its cause. Here's an analogy that makes this clear. Imagine a man standing in front of a cold stove on a winter morning. He's shivering. He wants heat. So he says to the stove, give me heat, and then I'll add the wood. We'd call that man a fool, wouldn't we? Everyone knows that a stove doesn't work that way. You must provide the fuel first. The heat comes as a consequence, as an effect of the cause you created. Yet that same man will go to his job and say, essentially, pay me what I'm worth, and then I'll provide the service. He wants the effect before he's created the cause. He has the sequence exactly backwards. It's like the farmer who wants to harvest before he plants, or the student who wants the diploma before the study, or the musician who wants the applause before the practice. The sequence matters. There is no other way. The Bible puts it simply, as ye sow, so shall ye reap. This isn't just spiritual poetry. It's a precise description of how value works in human exchange. You plant first, you tend and water and wait. Then and only then comes the harvest. Our rewards will always be in exact proportion to our service. This isn't idealism. It isn't wishful thinking. It's mechanics. The marketplace measures what you give before it determines what you get. Andrew Carnegie, who built one of the great American fortunes, observed that no person becomes wealthy without enriching others. Think about that. He didn't say no person becomes wealthy without taking from others. He said without enriching others. The mechanism is universal. Give before you get. Serve before you're paid. Create before you capture. Now here's what this means practically. The 95%, when thinking about money, ask, how can I earn more? How can I get ahead? What will pay me better? The 5% ask a different question. How can I serve more? How can I create more value? What can I contribute that people actually need? These questions lead in opposite directions. The first set focuses on extraction, on getting value out of the world. The second focuses on creation, on putting value into the world. And here's the paradox. The people who focus on creation end up extracting far more than those who focus on extraction. The people who think about service end up with more money than those who think about money, because they understand the sequence: cause, then effect; service, then reward. The farmer who focuses obsessively on the harvest while neglecting the planting will have nothing to harvest. But the farmer who focuses on the planting, on the soil quality, the seed selection, the watering schedule, the patient tending, will find that the harvest takes care of itself. Now let me address a common error here. The principle isn't work hard and you'll be rewarded. That's not quite right, and it trips people up. The 95% often work extremely hard but at the wrong things. They work hard following the crowd's formula. They work hard at activities that don't create genuine value. They work hard going in the wrong direction. Hard work plus wrong direction still leads to the wrong destination. A ship sailing at full speed toward the wrong port doesn't arrive at the right one by sailing faster. The principle is, create genuine value, real service that people actually need, and your rewards will be in proportion to that value. Not to your effort, not to your time, not to how much you want or deserve or believe you're owed, to your value, your service, your contribution. The question isn't, do I work hard? The question is, does my work make a genuine difference for others? Watch the language people use when they talk about their jobs. The 95% talk about what they receive, their salary, their benefits, their vacation days, their complaints about not getting enough. The 5% talk about what they contribute, their projects, their customers, their impact, their ideas for serving better. This isn't just attitude, it's focus. What you focus on expands. Focus on getting, and you see only what you're not getting. Focus on giving, and you discover endless opportunities to give more, and the rewards follow. The farmer doesn't dig up his seeds every day to see if they're growing. He trusts the process. He does the work, the planting, the tending, the watering, and he waits. He knows the harvest will come because harvests always come when you plant properly and wait patiently. The same patience is required for financial success. The 5% plant. They serve, they create value, and they wait. The 95% want the harvest without the planting, the heat without the wood, the reward without the service. And so they stand before the cold stove of life, demanding heat and wondering why they're always shivering. Starting today, before you ask, how can I earn more? Ask instead, how can I serve more? The answer to the second question produces the result of the first. It's that simple, and it works. Now here's how this applies to you today, this week, in the actual decisions you face. We've established the principle. The crowd is always wrong about the things that matter most. We've seen the evidence. Small differences compound into entirely different destinations. We've understood the mechanism. Service creates value, and value attracts reward. But a principle you can't practice is just a pleasant idea, and I don't want to leave you with pleasant ideas. I want to leave you with something you can use. So let me give you a specific technique, a practice you can begin immediately without waiting for circumstances to change or conditions to improve. I call it the weekly examination practice. For 1 week, just 7 days, I want you to do something simple. Every time you face a financial decision, any decision, no matter how small, pause, stop before you act, and ask yourself one question. Is this what the majority would do? That's it. Just that question. If the answer is yes, if you realize you're about to do what most people in your situation would do, then take one more step. Examine the opposite. Not choose the opposite. Not reject the common choice automatically. Just examine it. Consider it seriously as an option. Spend 60 seconds genuinely asking yourself, what would happen if I did the opposite here? You're about to lease a new car because that's what makes sense financially. Lower payments, nicer vehicle, everyone does it. Pause. The majority leases or finances. What's the opposite? Buying used, owning outright, driving it until it stops running. Examine that option seriously. You don't have to choose it, but you must examine it. You're about to upgrade your phone because the new model is out and your contract allows it. Pause. The majority upgrades. What's the opposite? Keeping the current phone another 2 years, directing that money elsewhere. Examine it. You receive a bonus at work. Your first thought is what to buy, where to go, how to celebrate. Pause. The majority spends windfalls. What's the opposite? Treating the bonus as if you never received it, moving it immediately to investments. Examine it. The power of this practice isn't in any single decision. It's in what it reveals over time. After 1 week of pausing and examining, you'll begin to see patterns you couldn't see before. You'll notice how often your personal choices are actually crowd choices wearing a personal mask. You'll recognize the pull of conformity in moments where you thought you were being independent. And you'll discover something else. The opposite is often better, not always. Sometimes examination reveals that the common choice is correct. The crowd isn't wrong about everything, and contrarianism for its own sake is just as mindless as conformity. But you'll find, more often than you expect, that the unconsidered alternative, the one you would have dismissed without thought, is actually superior. The crowd's choice often wins by default, not by merit. It wins because we never consider anything else. Now let me give you a more structured version of this practice for those who want to go deeper. Keep a decision journal. Nothing elaborate, just a small notebook or a note on your phone. When you face a significant decision, write down 3 things. First, what decision you're facing. Second, what the majority would do. Third, what the opposite would be. Then make your choice and note which path you took. After 3 months, review your journal. You'll see patterns you couldn't see in the moment. You'll notice where conformity was operating in your life without your awareness. You'll identify which opposite choices served you well and which didn't. This isn't about keeping score. It's about building awareness, because awareness is the beginning of change. Here's the key. Success isn't about knowing the right answers. It's about asking the right questions. The 95% don't ask the question at all. They don't pause. They don't examine. They simply do what seems normal, what seems sensible, what everyone around them is doing. They move through life on automatic, making decisions based on conditioning rather than consideration. The 5% pause. They ask. They examine. Different questions lead to different options. Different options lead to different choices. Different choices lead to different destinations. Socrates built his entire philosophy on a single practice, asking questions. He didn't claim to have all the answers. He claimed to have better questions than most people, and those questions led to insights that transformed everyone who encountered them. The unexamined life, he declared, is not worth living. The unexamined decision, we might add, is not worth making. Every wisdom tradition emphasizes examination over automatic response. The 5% have simply applied this ancient practice to financial decisions. They've turned a philosophical principle into a daily habit. Now here's the error to avoid. The principle isn't always do the opposite. It's always examine the opposite. Sometimes the crowd is right. Sometimes the popular choice is popular because it's genuinely good. Examination doesn't mean rejection. It means consideration. It means giving the unconsidered option a fair hearing before deciding. The difference between the 5% and the 95% isn't that one group always goes against the crowd. It's that one group examines while the other group assumes. One group chooses consciously while the other follows automatically. Conscious choice versus conditioned response. That's the difference. And it starts with a single question asked consistently in the small moments that seem to matter little but compound into everything. Is this what the majority would do? If yes, examine the opposite. It's that simple. But simple doesn't mean easy. Because the moment you begin choosing differently, you'll encounter something the crowd doesn't prepare you for. Resistance. Now let me prepare you for something that stops most people before they truly begin. The moment you start thinking differently from the crowd, the moment you begin questioning what everyone accepts and examining what no one considers, you will feel uncomfortable. You'll feel exposed, vulnerable, strange. You'll wonder if something is wrong with you. It isn't. That discomfort is the price of the ticket. Every valuable destination has a cost of entry. The mountain peak requires the climb. The skill requires the practice. The relationship requires the vulnerability. The physique requires the discipline. Financial independence requires something too, and it isn't primarily money. It's the willingness to think and act differently from the crowd, and the crowd doesn't take kindly to that. Here's what I want you to understand. Conformity exerts a constant gravitational pull. Every single day, through 1,000 small forces, you're being pushed back toward the river. Advertising does it by implying that everyone is buying something, using something, enjoying something. The appeal to conformity is the primary tool of commercial persuasion. They don't say this product is good, they say everyone has this product, because they know that most people want to be like everyone. Social expectation does it through casual conversation, through raised eyebrows, through the subtle signals that tell you when you're departing from the norm. Your friends don't mean to pull you toward conformity, but they're in the crowd themselves, and they're most comfortable when you're in it with them. Even your own mind does it, because you've spent decades absorbing the crowd's attitudes. Your internal voice, the one that tells you what's sensible and realistic, is often just the crowd speaking from inside your head. This gravitational pull never stops. It operates every day in every decision for your entire life, and resisting it has a cost. It's uncomfortable, it's tiring, it's lonely sometimes. Emerson understood this. He wrote, "For nonconformity, the world whips you with its displeasure." That's not a warning to avoid nonconformity. It's preparation for its cost. When you begin to choose differently, you will feel the world's displeasure. You'll feel it in the friend who questions your choices, in the family member who tells you to be realistic, in the colleague who wonders why you're not upgrading your lifestyle like everyone else, in your own uncertainty, when you lie awake at night wondering if you're making a mistake. Emerson called this the aversion of society to self-reliance. Society doesn't want you to be self-reliant. Society wants you to conform. It wants you back in the river, flowing with everyone else, headed toward the same destination. And when you resist, society pushes back. Here's what I want you to understand. That pushback is not a signal that something is wrong. It's a signal that something is right. You're moving against the current. Of course there's resistance. That's what currents do when you move against them. The resistance means you're going somewhere different from where the crowd is going. And where the crowd is going, remember, is broke. Now here's something practical. You must contaminate your conditioning. What do I mean by that? You've spent years, decades, probably absorbing the crowd's attitudes about money, success, spending, and saving. That conditioning doesn't disappear just because you've understood a principle. It's in your bones. It's in your reflexes. It's in the voice that tells you what's normal. If you want different results, you must expose yourself to different inputs. Seek out people who think like the 5%. Not to copy them blindly, but to absorb different attitudes, different assumptions, different automatic responses. Read what they read. Listen to what they say. Study how they make decisions. The farmer who wants different crops doesn't try harder with the same seeds. He plants different seeds. Your inputs determine your outputs. The ideas you're exposed to shape the thoughts you think. The thoughts you think shape the decisions you make. The decisions you make shape the life you live. If your inputs are all from the 95% of your friends, your media, your conversations all reinforce the crowd's thinking, then your outputs will be 95% outputs. You must deliberately introduce different inputs. You must contaminate your conformist conditioning with non-conformist ideas. Now here's something else that's crucial. Your environment isn't neutral. It's active. Look at your 5 closest friends. Not your acquaintances, not your colleagues, your 5 closest friends. The people you spend the most time with, whose opinions matter most to you. What are their financial habits? Their attitudes about money? Their relationship with spending and saving and building? Because here's the truth. Those 5 people represent your likely destination. You're swimming in the water they're swimming in. You're absorbing the attitudes they hold. You're calibrating normal to their standard. If your 5 closest friends are making the decisions the majority makes, you're in a current carrying you toward the majority's destination. Environment doesn't suggest it determines. This doesn't mean you abandon your friends. It doesn't mean you become arrogant or dismissive about their choices. It means you become aware of the influence, and you consciously, deliberately introduce other influences to balance it. Read books by people who built wealth rather than inherited it. Listen to those who achieved independence rather than dreamed about it. Find communities, even if only through reading of people who think like the 5%. Contaminate your conditioning with different ideas. Otherwise, your conditioning will win. Now let me address the final truth about this chapter. The discomfort of nonconformity is the price of the ticket. Everyone who achieved financial independence felt it. Every person who joined the 5% experienced the resistance, the questioning, the loneliness of moving against the current. They simply decided the destination was worth the discomfort of the journey. There is no other way to that destination. You cannot have conformity's comfort and nonconformity's results. You cannot stay in the river and arrive at the mountain peak. Choose your price. The crowd offers comfort, acceptance, and belonging, and delivers the crowd's destination. Independence offers discomfort, questioning, and occasional loneliness, and delivers somewhere entirely different. Now you know the cost. You can decide whether to pay it. But if you decide to pay it, if you accept the discomfort as the price of something valuable, then what exactly are you buying? What does financial independence actually mean? What becomes possible when you master these principles? The answer is bigger than money, much bigger. Now I want to show you something that expands far beyond your bank account. Everything we've discussed, the conformity principle, deliberate opposition, the compounding of small differences, applies to money. But money is just where you happen to notice it. The same principle governs everything. Think of a scientist who discovers a natural law. At first they notice it operating in one specific situation, an apple falling perhaps, or a compass pointing north. But as they investigate further, they realize the law isn't limited to that situation. It operates everywhere. Gravity doesn't just affect apples. Magnetism doesn't just affect compasses. The principle is universal. The conformity principle works the same way. You learned it through finances because that's what brought you here. But now watch. Watch how the same force that keeps people broke keeps them in wrong marriages, wrong careers, wrong health patterns, wrong relationships with their own minds. The crowd is wrong about health. Watch what the majority does. They eat what's convenient, what's advertised, what everyone eats. They move as little as everyone moves, which is to say, Barely at all. They follow diet trends when they panic and abandon them when the panic fades. And they arrive at the same destination everyone arrives at: diminished vitality, chronic conditions, bodies that break down decades before they should. The 5% do the opposite. They examine what the majority eats and consider alternatives. They notice that the crowd is sedentary and they choose movement. They make decisions about their health not based on what's normal, but based on what actually works. And they arrive at different destinations, not through luck or genetics, but through different inputs producing different outputs. Same principle, different domain. The crowd is wrong about relationships. Watch what the majority does. They follow scripts no one examined, act out roles no one questioned, accept relationship patterns, because that's just how it is. They communicate the way everyone communicates, which often means they don't really communicate at all. They let resentments build, let distance grow, let drift become separation. And they arrive where everyone arrives. The average marriage, the average divorce, the average loneliness. The 5% examine the scripts. They question the roles. They notice the patterns the crowd follows and ask whether those patterns serve them. They communicate when it's uncomfortable and stay present when it would be easier to drift away. Different inputs, different outputs, different destinations, same principle, different domain. The crowd is wrong about career. They climb ladders they didn't choose toward positions they never examined. They seek approval from authorities they didn't select and measure success by standards they absorbed without thought. They do what seems normal for someone at their level and wonder why they feel empty when they achieve it. The 5% ask different questions. They examine what the crowd calls success and decide whether it's actually success for them. They build rather than climb, create rather than compete, contribute rather than conform. Different inputs, different outputs, different destinations. Here's the key. Once you see the conformity principle in one area of life, you begin to see it everywhere. Aristotle observed that excellence lies between extremes found only by those who think carefully rather than do what everyone does. This isn't elitism. It isn't arrogance. It's observation. Excellence in any domain requires departure from the average. It has to. The average, by definition, is not excellent. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor who ruled an empire while ruling his own mind, wrote, "Our life is what our thoughts make it." He wasn't offering comfort. He was describing mechanics. Your thoughts create your actions. Your actions create your habits. Your habits create your results. Your results create your life. The thoughts the crowd thinks produce the life the crowd lives. Different thoughts produce different lives. This is true in finances. It's true in health. It's true in relationships. It's true in career. It's true in everything. Now here's something you need to understand. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. The excuse, "I'm just doing what everyone does," has now been permanently removed from your vocabulary. You know what everyone does produces. You've seen the statistics. You understand the mechanism. You can never unknow it. This is both a burden and a liberation. It's a burden because you can no longer drift unconsciously. You can no longer tell yourself that the crowd's destination isn't your fault, that you were just going along, that you didn't know any better. You do know better now. Every conformist decision from this point forward is made with full knowledge of where it leads. But it's also a liberation, the greatest liberation there is, because you now have something most people never acquire, the ability to see the current. You can recognize conformity when it's operating. You can identify the crowd's pull when it's pulling. You can pause before the automatic response and ask the question that changes everything. The 95% don't have this. They're in the river without knowing it's a river. They're conforming without knowing they're conforming. They're making decisions that seem like choices, but are actually reflexes. You're different now. You can see. And once you can see, you can choose. Not just about money, about everything. For 1 week, I want you to apply the examination practice to non-financial decisions. When you're about to eat what everyone eats, pause and examine. When you're about to spend your evening the way everyone spends their evening, pause and examine. When you're about to respond to a situation the way everyone responds, pause and examine. Ask the question, is this what the majority would do? If yes, examine the opposite. You'll discover that conformity has been operating in areas you never suspected. And you'll discover that the same simple question opens new options everywhere. What began as a question about money has become a question about life. How do you want to live? That question leads us to the final truth, the deepest implication of everything we've explored together. Let me return now to that photograph we started with. The crowded street, the river of gray suits, men walking in the same direction, carrying the same briefcases, wearing the same expressions. A current of humanity flowing toward a common destination. You've seen that photograph differently since the moment I showed it to you. But I wonder if you know just how differently you see it now. At the beginning, it was just a picture of people. Normal people living normal lives, making normal decisions. What could be wrong with that? Now you see the current. You see the conformity. You see a river carrying everyone in it toward the same destination, a destination that, for 95% of them, means financial failure, unfulfilled potential, and the quiet regret of a life lived according to other people's scripts. But here's what I really want you to see. Picture yourself in that photograph now. Feel what you would feel if you were standing on that street, shoulder to shoulder with the crowd, moving in the same direction everyone else is moving. You feel the current, don't you? That subtle pressure to go along, to fit in, to do what everyone else is doing. It's comfortable. It's easy. It's what everyone does. And you now understand exactly where it leads. Now picture something else. Picture yourself stepping out of that river, stepping onto the bank, standing still while the current flows past you. What do you feel? You feel the pull still conformity never stops pulling. You feel the discomfort of standing apart, of being different, of not flowing with everyone else. You feel exposed. But you also feel something else, something most people never taste: freedom. Not just financial freedom, though that matters, not just independence, though that matters too, something deeper, something that makes everything else possible. The freedom to think your own thoughts, the freedom to make your own decisions, the freedom to choose your own direction rather than being carried by someone else's current, the freedom to be the author of your life rather than a character in someone else's story. This is the freedom that 95% never taste. They spend their entire lives as leaves blown by the wind of public opinion. They do what's expected, think what's common, choose what's normal, and they never realize that there was another option. They never step out of the river. They never even see it as a river. But you see it now, and that changes everything. Here's what I want you to understand. You're reading this, you've made it this far, because some part of you refuses to accept the crowd's destination. That part of you that feels restless with average results. That part that knows there must be more than doing what everyone does and getting what everyone gets. That part that looks at the statistics and refuses to believe they have to apply to you. That part isn't a problem to be solved. It isn't dissatisfaction to be medicated or distracted away. It's wisdom trying to get your attention. Honor that part. Feed it. Let it grow stronger. The crowd will tell you to be realistic. The crowd will tell you to fit in. The crowd will tell you that your restlessness is immature, that your ambition is foolish, that you should settle down and accept what everyone accepts. Don't listen. That voice isn't wisdom. It's the river trying to pull you back in. Now here's what I need you to understand about the path ahead. You don't choose the 5% once and stay there permanently. You choose it every day in every decision. The current never stops flowing. The gravitational pull of conformity never disappears. The crowd never stops calling you back. Every morning you wake up and the river is still there, still flowing, still ready to carry you along. Every day you face decisions where the easy choice is the crowd's choice. Every week brings new pressure to conform, to fit in, to do what everyone does. The question is answered fresh each time. Will you flow with it, or will you stand against it? Today, tomorrow, and every day after that. I began this documentary by asking why 95% of people end up broke. The answer, we've discovered, isn't complicated. They follow the 95%. They conform their thoughts to common thoughts, their decisions to common decisions, their lives to common patterns. They absorb the crowd's attitudes and accept the crowd's destinations, and they receive the common result. The 5% do one thing differently. They observe what the majority does and systematically examine the opposite, not blindly, not rebelliously, thoughtfully. They pause where others rush. They question where others assume. They consider where others conform. They ask a simple question. If this produces failure, what produces success? And then they do that instead. That question is now yours. The seeds for financial independence, for life independence, for real freedom are planted not in your circumstances, but in your mind. The question of whether you'll join the 5% will be answered not by what happens to you, but by what you decide. Not by the economy or your upbringing or your luck or your circumstances, but by whether you can see the river, step out of it, and choose your own direction. Not someday, today. Not in grand gestures that change everything at once, but in the small choices you make in the next hour, the next day, the next week. The examination practice, the decision journal, the deliberate contamination of your conditioning with different ideas, the willingness to feel uncomfortable while the crowd flows past. These are small things. They don't look revolutionary. They won't impress anyone watching. But they compound 1 degree over 10,000 miles to an entirely different destination. The crowded street will still be there tomorrow. The current will still be flowing. The 95% will still be following the 95%, arriving at the 95%'s destination, wondering why life turned out the way it did, but you don't have to flow with it. Not anymore. You've seen the river for what it is. You've learned the principle that governs it. You've acquired the practice that lets you resist it. You've paid attention when the crowd was scrolling, seeking, sleeping. The person you will be in 10 years is being shaped by the decisions you make starting now. Shape that person consciously, or the crowd will shape them for you. The choice as always is yours, but now you know what you're choosing between, and that makes all the difference. Start today. You have nothing to lose, but you have your whole life to win.